Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio with, I always say this, a fun little project. It's probably a quick and easy project, but there's a couple of techniques in it that I want to be able to show you. And it's for this little drawstring bag. Now I call this sort of a shoe bag. And I originally devised this project when I was going to stay with some family, and I didn't want to put my grubby shoes in with my nice clean clothes in my suitcase. So I thought I could do with making myself a couple of shoe bags, and then my shoes can go in that. But this one actually doesn't ever have shoes in it. It hangs up on in my bathroom with soaps in it. But it's a really nice size bag, which is 11.5 by 15. But actually, not do it up. Let's turn it inside out, because the two techniques I want to show you today is, and I'm going to put this under the close-up so you can see it, this seam here, which is called a flat felled or a felled seam, F-E-L-L-E-D, and it's a technique they use in dressmaking. You particularly get it on the side of jeans. It's a really nice strong seam, but what that does is it hides all the raw edges for the seam. And the other technique for a hidden seam is the French seam. So they're the two seams we're going to cover in this project, and they're the two techniques I use on this bag to make sure that there's no raw edges on the inside of this, so it can go in and out of the wash quite happily, as well as looking sort of nice and neat on the inside. So I've got one prepped here. Let me put that one to the side. I've got one here prepped ahead of time because I want to spend the time on those two seams, but I will just talk through what I've done on these. So on both of these, I've got two pieces of fabric. Now this is a slightly smaller version of that because I was trying to use up scraps, and I came across this fabric and it's like, oh, I really want to use that fabric. But I didn't have a big enough piece to do that size. So I've just sort of scaled it down a little bit. But I will give you the measurements for the shoe bag size, and then I will give you the measurements for that. So I've got to check on my notes so I don't get anything wrong. So on the shoe bag size, I have two pieces at the top, which I call my A pieces. And they measure on the shoe bag 13 3/4 by 11. On this version, they are measuring 11 by 9. So the 11 is the width, and the 13 3/4 on that one is the width. And then the B, which I call this, which is the base, and I like to have this out of one piece of fabric, so there's no seam on the bottom. It just sort of loops around. And that piece, you only need one of that, sorry, you need two of your A pieces. On your B piece, on the shoe bag, it's 13 3/4, so the same width by 12.5. And on this version I'm doing, it is 11, so same width again, by 13. Just a note on this one, if you've got a directional fabric, it doesn't work here very well, because on one side of the bag, it'll be right side up, and on the other side of the bag, it'll be upside down. So if you've got a directional fabric you want to use, you'll have to do these two as two separate pieces and then do a French seam to put them all together at the end. So you'll need to adjust the measurements of your bottom piece to add a bit more seam allowance into that. So just a note on that point. So I've prepared half the bag ahead of time. Let me just, before I go on to that though, let me just talk about the other thing I've just done here. I've just made two channels, and these are for the drawstrings to go through, and they just sit on top of the bag. So all you've got on the inside is a couple of neat rows of stitching that hold those in. And on the shoe bag version, they measure 3 by 11. So 3 inches tall, 11 inches wide. And on this version, I've made them 3 by 8 inches. It's going to be a narrower bag, so I've just shortened that length a little bit. And all we do on those is fold them in half, so you've got sort of the short edges, and then you sew around 3 of the edges, leaving a gap for turning, and just turn them through. And then all I've done, as you can see here, is you just top stitch down the 2 edges, being careful not to top stitch down your short edges, otherwise your ribbon won't go through. I've done that. So, you know, you get carried away and you just keep sewing, don't you? And then it's like, oh, I haven't left a gap for my ribbon. So that's what I've done so far on this. The other thing I've done on the top section is I've just double hemmed it. So all that means is you turn over 1/4 inch, and then you turn it over 1/4 inch again, and you just top stitch that down. So once I tend to prepare my 2 top pieces first with the channel and the hem at the top. I don't know if it's a hem if it's at the top, probably not. And then I'm going to attach it to the base. As I said, I've done one side, and I'm going to flip that over so you can see what that's looking like on the inside. But it's all nice and neat. But I'm going to show you how we do that on this one. So I'm going to grab my ruler. I'm going to grab a friction pen, and I'm going to take my A piece, and I'm going to lay it on my mat, and I'm going to draw an inch draw a line 1/2 inch in. Now this is slightly different to how they do it in dressmaking. What they tend to do in dressmaking is make their normal 5/8 of a seam and trim one back. So I have sort of converted it slightly, just because I wanted to maximise how much fabric sometimes I get out of the pieces I'm using. And on the right side of the fabric, I'm going to draw a line that's 1/2 inch from that raw edge. So let me just put that under the close-up so you can see that there. So there we've got our line that's 1/2 inch away. And then I'm going to grab some pins and grab my other piece. So this is the base. I'm going to match the raw edge up with that drawn line. And I'm doing it under the close-up so you can see exactly. So that's what that looks like. So you can see 1/2 inch of that top piece of fabric peeking through there. And I'm going to pin really well along there. And we're going to come and we're going to sew 1/4 inch away from this edge. So away from where we've drawn the line and that edge. So in effect, that bottom piece will have a 3/4 inch seam and the top piece will have 1/4 inch seam. I hope that makes sense. So this is my version of doing this instead of trimming a seam back. So let's take that to the machine and sew that. Okay, so I'm going to sew 1/4 inch away from there. Now, if you're like mine, you've got a foot with a bar on. You just want to place it along that edge and just make sure that the fabric stays flat as you're sewing. I'll take my pins out as I go. So now here at the iron, I'm just going to press that first seam flat, just get some heat on it to set the seam. And then I'm going to take this longer piece and fold it so it comes up to meet that other edge. Just move that so it's in shot. And then now we've got that turned edge, we can fold the whole thing over flat. So I'm just fiddling with that to get that a bit straighter. So that's what that seam looks like there. And now I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm just going to top stitch along that edge to hold that down. So that's what that seam looks like. It's all nice and flat, and it's all those raw edges are all tucked in nice and neatly and out the way. So now we're ready for final assembly for the French seams. So what we're going to do is line these two pieces of fabric up. And the first thing I should say is, unlike what we normally do, which is right sides together, with a French seam, you always start with wrong sides together. So we're going to sew in effect the seam twice. And the point I'm matching is where the bottom of the bag meets the top of the bag. That's going to be the point that's going to be the most visible. So I'm probably going to pin that really well. I'll probably put 2 or 3 pins along there because we don't want that shifting. And then the same on the other side. So just making sure it's lined up. It's more important we match that than what's happening at the top, because by the time we've sort of done the drawstring on that, that top doesn't lay level anyway, or your eye doesn't see if it's not laying level. One more pin there. I'm going overboard on the pins, I know. I'm just going to check I'm happy with it on that side. And I think I am. So now we're going to do a 1/4 inch seam, both sides of that. Now, if you were doing directional, you would have 2 halves. You would also have to do a 1/4 inch seam along the bottom as well. Now we're going to trim these seams back a little bit by about half, so we're going to trim it back to about 1/8. And that does 2 things. It shortens the seam, but it also takes off all the straggly bits which can sometimes poke through the seam when you come to do the second stage of this. So we're just going to neaten everything up and trim it back. And it feels like there's a new blade in that. That's really sharp. So that's what our bag is looking like, and we've just trimmed that seam back. We're now going to turn our bag around the other way, so it's right sides together this way. I'm going to take that to the iron again, just give it another press so everything's lying flat, and then we're going to come back and sew with that seam again. And you just want to spend a little bit of time getting this right, because the flatter you can get this and the more precise, the better your French seam will come out. It makes it easier for the second stage of sewing. Now we're going to take that to the machine and we're going to sew 1/4 inch or slightly bigger than 1/4 inch. We're going to be generous with our seam. So there's our seams all sewn. So we're going to give those one final press. And I'm just going to hit that from both sides. So should we turn it through and see how we did? Pulling away threads here, look. We spend our life doing this, don't we? Oh, there's a little one that needs to be trimmed. I'll do that afterwards. Ooh, another one there. Oh no, that was loose. So but let's just give it another press actually from this side. Beautiful fabric. And there it is. Let's put it that way so you can see it properly. So we can put our drawstring in. Now I use these loop turners. It makes it ever so easy. Now just two things actually before I put the ribbon in. I measure down 1.5 inches. So the top of the channel there is 1.5 inches away from the edge of the bag, and I just sort of centre it. Now the pieces of ribbon for this one, I think I've got two 40-inch lengths. You need enough ribbon to sort of loop through twice and go through and go around the back with a little bit extra. So I'm just going to use my little loop turner here. And normally I just poke that into the ribbon and you can just pull it through. And then, see if I can push it through from the other side. It works better if you pull it. No, let's pull it. It's so quick. And this was just a bit of grosgrain ribbon I had in my stash. I think it came on a fat quarter bundle. Sometimes they're tied up with ribbon. So that's one piece, that side, and you want it to loop it round so your loose ends come out one on each side. So this time now. I just confused myself then. Right, it's there. Which piece of ribbon is it? That piece. And then when we draw our bag up, we've got our drawstring. Now I normally just open out the bag like so, and then tie a knot, and do that when it's flat because you want a bit of excess when you open the bag. Just talking about that fabric, I think it was Fat Quarters, from Fat Quarters that were called, I think it was Camilla, I think it was a Wyndham's Fabrics one. It had sort of reds and blues and these lovely sort of beigey stone colours in it. So I wanted, as I said, I wanted to do this size because that was from my scrap. That was from my remnants, I should call them, because that was quite a big scrap. Rather than scraps. And I'm just going to trim off my ribbons on a bit of a slant. And there's our project all finished. So another nice little drawstring bag. So I hope you enjoyed those two little techniques to do those seams so that you've got no raw edges. Like I say, it works perfectly in these unlined bags. So if you give them a go, do tag us on social media with any of your photos, or you can send an email to us direct. And if you don't mind us using those photos, do let us know, because then when we share some of the photos that people have sent in as inspiration for others, we know we can do that. So thank you ever so much for joining me. If you've liked this video, do all those fabulous things like comment, share, subscribe, and I hope to see you again here next time in the sewing studio.